Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Blurred Box. I'm Chloe.
I'm Sophie.
And I am Andrew.
And
he is Clifford.
Yeah, exactly. Clifford, you want to say hi to everyone?
Yeah, hi. I'm glad to be on here as a guest and future co-host. Going on a podcast, something I've always wanted to do, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm glad Andrew got me into this.
Awesome. Yeah. So you kind of spilled the beans already before we let everyone know. But yeah, so Clifford's our new podcast co-host coming in starting from next year. Andrew and I are, along with Pooja, our seniors. So unfortunately, we will be leaving you all, but not to worry, because Clifford and Sophie will be taking on as new anchors of Blurred Box, along with some new, excited, cool people. So yeah, that's kind of like the main news. Welcome back to the show. In the last episode, we tackled the college process from personal perspectives, and we're going to definitely come back to that with the help of some reoccurring guests from the last season. But today we're going to talk about something else. We've already introduced you to our special someone. So Andrew, why don't you tell us a bit about how you met Clifford and kind of how we've managed to pull him onto here?
Yeah, Clifford's a year below me at Trinity for all of our devoted listeners who are diehard Trinity fans now. And, at brick and mortar schools, you really get to meet people, even if you don't have classes in them. No shade. Clifford and I, we really sort of, bonded, one might say, over our school satire magazine. I was the big man on campus, the editor. Cliff was just a lowly staff writer, but a friendship was formed. Good times were had. Articles were written. Yeah, but okay, so how did Cliff end up on the podcast? Chloe and all of you guys, you were like, Andrew, we really love your perspective and your charm and your wit and just that brick and mortar vibe. And I was like, stop it, guys. And they were like, you're leaving next year. And I said, I know, I'm sad. And so I'll speed this story up. But so they're like, find someone to replace you who's also a brick and mortar school person.
Well, that just makes it sound really transactional and not cruel at all.
Oh, true.
We only want you for your school status.
Right. Like, thanks.
It's sad.
Well, and also someone who's charming and witty and amazing. And so I went to Clifford and I was like, hey, do you like the sound of your own voice? And he said, what? And then I sort of explained, I was like, it's a great group of people, a good time, devoted listeners. Shout out to all of you real fans. And so he's here now, and that's the story, I think. But I'll let him speak to his side because I don't know if he heard it that way.
Yeah, well, I think I did. And I was very happy to see that message from Andrew. And yeah, the garlic has been a big part of my time at Trinity. It's given me in its own way kind of an outlet for more of the satirical side of my voice, and just giving me something to write in. But I think a podcast is a very different kind of expression. We're going to go into that a bit in this episode. But yeah, a little bit about me. So yeah, as Andrew said, I'm currently a junior at Trinity, and I'm a senior editor of The Garlic, as well as a writer. And some other things I do on the side, I produce and compose and write music. I haven't had as much time for that recently, but it's something I'm passionate about. And I also act at school, and I like coding as well. That's sort of a newer thing, but I'm getting into that. But yeah, I think I'm very excited to be able to bring my perspective to this podcast.
Nice. Yeah, we're really excited to have you too. So something interesting we wanted to share with all of you is that when we first met Clifford, like standard thing we ask is like, why do you want to come on the podcast, right? Obviously it sounds cool and all, and it's amazing, but like, what's your reason for wanting to come on, despite, being with cool people and talking about cool stuff? So one of the things like that really popped up to me, and I remembered from like months later, was that he was like, I want to come on the podcast to have this platform to share my opinions. And along the lines of that, I think the topic surrounding that in itself is quite important and just interesting in general to us. So could you talk a bit about that specific statement and where does that reasoning and thoughts stem from, I guess?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think especially in this era of online school, and honestly, I'm not sure how you guys deal with it because it's just it can be very isolating sometimes. And I think the internet just, in it without podcasts, it doesn't always feel like enough because in a brick and mortar school, you're just constantly getting into conversations with people. And I mean, I know it with my friends, like when we've been going to our weeks in-person school, we've had all this just pent up conversation, all these current events to talk about, all these issues. And I mean, I feel like a lot of the conversations I have with people at Trinity almost resemble a podcast already. If you just put a microphone in there, you'd sort of have a podcast. And I think when you take that in-person part of life out of it and you're not having those interactions every day, you need something to replace that. And I think that this could be the perfect thing. And that was my reasoning behind that.
And I would just second that. Cliff was quick on it. I love to hate on the whole, I don't get how you have a social life at online high schools. But no, I think that's true. I mean, for me, like coming onto a podcast, while I know it seems like I have infinite experience, and I'm just such a pro, this was sort of a very new thing and something that I hadn't really thought about before I joined this amazing team of podcasters. And so I think it is definitely a different kind of vibe, a different, it's like a really different medium to talk and to be a little more on the spot, a little more free flowing. Yeah. And I think that's something that's good to do rather than just like, oh, how do I perfectly write every word of my ideas versus like, how do I articulate my ideas on the spot?
Mm-hmm. I actually really liked what Clifford said, that it seems like his conversations at school resembled a podcast, because I didn't actually think about that. And I feel like that fact really highlights what is good about podcasts, is that we're listening into conversations between people that have different perspectives. And for me personally, I think those are the best ways to kind of grow as a person, because you're not always kind of sucked into your own view and your own perspective, but you're listening to other people. So I never thought about it, but it seems like podcasts, like comparatively to other platforms, like writing articles or something like that, seems a little bit more human. Like you have kind of like a connection with the hosts. It's a free flowing conversation, and it's a very unique way to kind of advocate and share your opinions. So I found that an interesting kind of point.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to kind of ask you guys, or more for Clifford, being here as our guest, why the interest, or I think this is easy for us to answer probably because we've been doing this, but why feel the need to share our opinions, our thoughts on all these philosophies? Why even record a conversation, or why feel the need for like a school conversation that you're talking about, Clifford, at school to be published or heard by other people? Why do you feel that way? Or why do you guys feel that way?
I mean, I think that, I mean, on the one hand, just kind of personally satisfying, I think just as humans, we like to be heard. We like our opinions to be expressed. But I think also, I mean, we can't underestimate like the amount of exposure we've had to various things. I think we're kind of told in society, teenagers shouldn't be talking as much. It's the experienced adults who should be talking. But, in reality, we've seen a lot of young people do great things. I mean, you look at Greta Thunberg. I mean, you look at all those people, and we can do that too. And I think we have to recognize that. I think part of the reasoning for like speaking out as a young person is to kind of realize that potential and almost use your youngness to your advantage to make some sort of a change. And obviously, right now we're not exactly changing the world entirely, but we might do that someday. And I think that's a lot of time that's the end goal.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts of that myself, actually. I don't know. I feel like it's just something that we don't really think about until like the questions posed on us. Like, why do we want to make change, like as young individuals? And I guess I'll be like a little bit frank. I feel like, between generations, there are a lot of gaps. We view kind of society differently, through different lens. We have different priorities. And while I will admit that sometimes we don't know everything, but because we're growing, but it doesn't mean that our perspective is less important in any way. It needs to be heard, because like we're going to be the ones that are going to be inheriting our society and our world, because they're going to just like generations just die out. It's how it works. But we're going to be the upcoming generation. I guess climate change is a pretty good example to this. Like, I feel like the previous generations have not been doing a really great job to kind of fixing our planet. And then we're going to be the ones stuck with everything that's happening, and we're going to be the ones that have to solve things. So it's good to educate ourselves early, and it's good to start conversations early.
No, yeah, I totally agree. What Clifford said in the very beginning, or like first answer, is that teenagers or just people in general want to be heard. And I think that's the crux of it as well. Like, I would agree. One of the things, like, or why did we start this podcast? Yeah, to be heard. That amongst, like, yes, our agenda is different in terms of being like, you know, we started from a club and being like, we are passionate about certain causes and we want that to be essentially, actually, it's the same thing. It's we wanted to be heard. We wanted that cause to be heard, but along those lines, we also wanted to touch upon other subjects so that while you're listening to us talk about these things, you're hearing about all these other stuff. And I guess in the same way, it's pretty, it's beneficial for us too. Like, don't get me wrong, it's great making good content for you guys and we love doing it for you, but there's something in it for us as well. So Clifford, could you tell us a bit about, before we go into it, as hosts have already done this for, well, Andrew's one season, but like for me and Sophie, quite a while, seems like. But what was the appeal to you?
I mean, I think a lot of it just comes from kind of a different medium because, you know, at Trinity, I mean, Andrew can speak to this, but I mean, and I think he was talking about this a bit, you know, we're told to kind of, you know, write perfectly, no errors, you know, you need to think about it, revise multiple times to get your point across. You can't just say something, you know, it has to be perfect. You have to really, you know, write it for your classes or whatever. I think just this different environment was very appealing, just a sort of different way of talking. And I think that that's one of the points of this episode too, you know, the kind of writing things online versus having this conversation. I think the conversation aspect of something is something that's very important and very appealing to me, partially because of what I was saying before. And I mean, I think in terms of what's personally rewarding, I think what's rewarding is just kind of getting my voice out in that sort of less censored way, like not in the form of an English paper, but in the form of, you know, who I am and what I believe.
Yeah, I'll also chime right in and build off of that, which is, and I'm sure Cliff would be likely to agree, which is also when we have discussions at school, it's a charged political climate, I would say. And it's like you say one wrong thing and the people are not appreciative of that. Like, it's very much you will be judged and critiqued and strongly disliked if you like say one wrong thing at school. Like, that's a judgment of not just your political beliefs, but like your moral character, your everything. And so, like, for me personally, I'm more or less sort of apolitical at school just because I'm just like, it's not worth it. Like, for people who generally our school, we're very, very liberal. And it's like, if you say anything that is disagreed with, you are wrong, you are evil, you are Trump in the next coming. And so I think that's a real bummer. And that's part of why I like here, like, not just because it's a podcast, but also like talking to different people. Like, Chloe's in Hong Kong, Sophie's in not New York, Colorado or California or something. Yeah, it's all west. Yeah.
East Coasters do not appreciate the West Coast that much. It's sad.
Oh, it's just a shame. But like Andrew and Clifford, as to your points, or maybe my point is a bit more in response to Andrew, but like you guys are saying that it's more of a pressured climate, right, in school. And brick and
Yes.
mortar with Trinity. But then being a public kind of podcast where this is being heard everywhere, like we release this on Spotify, Apple, like you search us up and you'll hear us talking about no pressure. But like things like that we say online get heard, right? That's the whole point of why we're doing this. We want to be heard. But at the same time, because you're online, you have so much more of a gateway for hate, for criticism from anyone, right? Not just those people in your schools. Do you not think that there's more pressure to that?
I mean, I would say first of all, and then Cliff, sorry, I sort of jumped right in there, but I would say first of all, the Blurred Box fans, I don't know if we have a name for our fans, are very kind. I haven't gotten any hate mail yet, so that's
The blurry
a big
boxers.
plus.
Is that our fans?
Exactly.
The blurry boxers.
The blurry
Exactly.
boxers.
Boxers.
But
Right?
so
The
I'd
boxers.
say- yeah, so far, no hate yet. We love that. But no, I'd say part of it is like, I do feel like I don't feel self-conscious about my beliefs. Like I'm a pretty confident guy, as I think people who have heard this for a while might know. But I think just like part of it is at my school, like we'll see what Cliff says about this. But like even if you go like moderately liberal, people are like, what do you mean you're not like going to go all out? Like liberal is the only way and anything else is Republican. Like far left is the only way and anything else is Republican. Where like for me, I'm like, I don't know. I think there's more nuance than that. I'm not saying like, like those conservatives, they've got it all right. But I think there's more nuance than that. And I think this forum allows for more than that versus you get up and because like also like, I mean, my friends don't talk about politics a ton, but we've had this conversation before. They're boys and they're all that entails of like, oh wow, you're being too woke, whatever. But so I'd say there's a lot to it, and I think this forum, for me at least, lends itself better to these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I think about it too, sort of from a different lens. I mean, you know, like what Andrew was talking. I mean, talking in class and talking these large groups. I think just mentally you sort of treat that a bit differently. It's more about kind of impressing people. You're trying to like kind of put out your own name more than you're trying to actually say something that matters to you. And I mean, even if like this is going out to a lot of people and it'll be on the internet, I mean, like those people aren't here now. And I mean, that seems like kind of a distinction without a difference. But I think like in terms of just how you perceive it, it is a major distinction. And I think, you know, that this feels more like kind of having a natural conversation than, you know, making your comments in a large classroom filled with people who in some cases are just ready to judge you. And I think that that's part of what makes it so valuable for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because I also wonder, like, why do I feel like way more uncomfortable, like doing things in front of like people I know rather than strangers? I always wondered, and it gives a cool perspective that not cool, but like an interesting perspective that we kind of view the world very narrowed. Like we kind of only see those around us. And I think that's kind of like the cause of a lot of echo chambers. And I think that's probably something that's happening in your school, where your thoughts particularly don't matter. It's more of like as a collective and you have to kind of go into that collective. But in a podcast, and I think what we've curated really well is that it's not an echo chamber. It's about bringing this different perspectives. It's about challenging ideas and questioning things and discussing and listening to each other. So I think the main thing, yeah, it is a mental thing. I think we have different intentions when we are talking to those we know, especially in a school environment. But it's also about kind of the environment that we've curated, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. For our co-hosts a little bit, what did you guys, from the question that was posed before, what did you guys gain or lose from coming on this podcast? How has this podcast experience helped you in any way?
I would say, what have I lost from it? I like that one better. What have I lost? I've lost nothing. I've lost a void that you've all filled now.
Oh.
Aww.
What have I gained from it? I don't know. I would say, what have I gained? I would say some political mojo. I would say no. I think like there is something to be said for like like you pay attention a little bit more to things when you're like, maybe I'll talk about this. So that's one thing. But then two, just like actually speaking and learning how to develop your ideas about important issues. Like obviously, believe it or not, like I don't mind public speaking. I speak in public like when the occasion presents itself, and I love that. It like takes a little bit of practice to figure out how you want to do that. And so that's something I've gained, other than of course all of your amazing friendship and that.
Yeah, for sure. Sophie?
Yeah, I'll follow up on that. For me, I just never expected to go on a podcast ever before. I think a lot of times in high school, like there's a lot of things weighing you down. And for me personally, I felt like sometimes my confidence was slipping and kind of like I just had like more insecurities. I didn't want to really speak up or anything like that. But I really feel like being in this podcast has been such an important and amazing time during my high school time here. So it taught me kind of that I shouldn't really be afraid to speak out, because that's something that I struggled with a lot. I am less afraid to debate for something that I care about. And I also feel like I trust myself and my intellect more than before, which to me, that's a really big thing. And I am incredibly grateful for that experience. And I think another big takeaway from this podcast and what I've gained was just like the format, and it was like the connections I made and the discussions I had. Like all of you guys are amazing people, and the discussions that arise from all of our different perspectives are incredibly engaging. And I think I've grown more as a person and as an individual through just like hearing what you guys have to say. And it's not just my own perspective all the time, it's what you also have to think. It's also taught me to listen more, kind of not be afraid to engage in conversations that might be uncomfortable too sometimes. So just a lot of things. And personally, I feel like I've grown a lot through this experience. Still very shocked that I agreed to doing this in the very beginning.
I mean,
like,
I kind of forced you, so that's on me. But like, yeah, glad you came on board either way, willing or unwilling.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Clifford's here willingly. Not we didn't force him.
That we know of.
About to like expose ourselves. Like we paid him a ransom. Like he had to come on. But yeah, I think that just to give my quick input on that before I move on to my next question. Yeah, for sure. I think doing a podcast is something that I've wanted to do personally for a long time, and I just never. I didn't feel passionate enough about like what I want, or like I was like, I know I want to do this, but I need to do it properly, directed towards something. And I think with these kinds of things, you do kind of need to do that for it to matter. Well, not really matter. Everyone's voice matters, but depending on the topic, on how effective it is, I think is what I'm trying to get at. And doing it through this output was definitely more effective because first of all, it's more interactive with more people. It's about format, like you guys were saying. And yeah, I've definitely learned a lot. Like I've learned how to be a better speaker. I've learned how to conduct conversations better, how to interview people a lot more, not through a pressuring way. That's a skill. I think if you guys also go back to our first season and how we talk to our guests, I think not just from me, but from all of us, from Sophie and Pooja, and if you were with us from the beginning with Haven, the way we interact with our guests are completely different from like first to fifth episodes to now. Like, not to hate on ourselves, but like it sounds more like a interrogation than an actual like what Clifford had an appeal to come on, I think is what he was saying. Like it's an actual natural conversation, and learning to do that is so different, you know, as well as like learning how to curate, or not curate, but like create your own voice, like Andrew was then saying. And then growing from how you make your opinions, how you learn from your opinions, and those conversations you have, like what Sophie said. So all those things I completely agree with, and I definitely just loved about that experience. Nothing I lost. In the vein of that conversation, I wanted to ask as well, we're curious about like the presence of podcasts? Like, how does that exist in your world? Which sounds so alien, but like for me and Sophie, for example, just to give you some insight, podcasts are online. There's been a huge resurgence of podcasts, I think, globally, not just in our school. Sophie and I and Pooja have talked about, like, you know, after doing Blurred Box, there's been a lot of other podcasts that also came up with ours during this time period of COVID. But not just in our school, right? For the rest of the world, a lot of people have started doing podcasts because I'm not sure if that's the only thing that we can do during lockdown, but for us online, it's easy. And I think in our heads, it makes sense because in an online environment, we're in the same vein of having another platform online. But you guys are in person. I want to know how podcasts exist in your world and how that kind of stems.
Yeah, I mean, I think they aren't really a big thing at Trinity. I mean, I don't know if Andrew knows any, but I can't really think of any podcasts like that are affiliated with the school. I mean, these people have their private ones, but I mean, we have the Trinity Times, which I believe Andrew leads. That's
Oh,
kind of
yes.
that's not a podcast. That's the biggest example of, you know, how people get their voice out there. But I mean, that's not a conversation. It's written. You can't have that real time response to it with something that's written. I think.
See.
But I think a lot of it is kind of what I was talking about. I think like basically the presence of a brick and mortar environment lets us sort of have these conversations in our daily life and means that we don't really need a podcast to communicate that. But I think in general,
nice.
I mean, I can't speak to everybody at Trinity, but like for me, I have been like starting to listen to more podcasts. I mean, I wasn't really a podcast listener before quarantine, but especially recently, I've been looking into some. And I mean, it's really, and I've also been noticing a general trend because I've been listening to some music podcasts. I'm seeing a real shift where, you know, people need something to talk about. They need some way to get their voice out there. So now they're opening up more about their creative process, opening up more about, you know, things you don't usually hear about or the things that they would talk about behind closed doors. But now there's still need to talk about it. So it ends up going on the internet. And I think honestly that openness is very helpful. And Trinity could honestly use some more of that.
Yeah, I'll second what Cliff started with. I don't think there are any school affiliated podcasts, though there was almost a garlic podcast last year.
I didn't know that.
But back to the point. But I think what Clifford said about people actually like saying their creative process. I'm still not much of a podcast listener because I have brand loyalty. You're my one and only. But no. I think there are a lot of people who are super into it. My whole family is super into podcasts. Like a bunch of my teachers are into podcasts. I will say though, I know we said it's like more free flowing than written work and stuff like that. But I think it's definitely better to have some structured conversation where like there's an actual, you know, we actually do prepare for these. And
Spoiler, yeah. You just exposed us, Andrew. You're supposed to keep the facade up.
I thought that made us seem more professional. I think there's something to that of like, we actually, it's structured. There is like an actual method to the madness. There are actual topics we want to talk about and like actually having like, you say something, someone responds, and it's a continued dialogue versus like a little bit of discussion.
Yeah, for sure. Like as much as I think the impression that most people get it, including me, was that like when you listen to these podcasts and they're like, oh, hey, welcome back. We're going to talk about stuff. And you're like, oh, great. They just like pulled this out of their pants like today and was like, let's talk about some topic. Like, no, like we actually, despite what you might think is that there's structure, there's planning, there's like, we've got stuff down. Like, yeah,
no one would ever guess.
No one would ever guess. Right. So yeah, it's a fun time. And like Andrew said, structured conversations are important.
Can I say one thing? This is going to be my serious comment of the day,
Go.
Which is that I think it would be irresponsible to record this podcast where like we're supposed to be, and normally are, and I would say still sort of are, focused on like human rights and more serious problems without mentioning the violence we saw in Atlanta. I don't know if that made it across to you in Hong Kong, but
sorry, I saw that.
I meant to mention it at the start, but I think it's horrible and terrible. And I think while it does get news coverage, the fact that it is essentially white supremacy, again, just sort of rearing its head and being obviously targeted at the Asian American community, I think not to make this all necessarily political, because it's more than just that, but like I think it reflects part of the continued legacy of the Trump presidency, but I think it also reflects the deep divide and hatred rooted in the foundation of American society. And
Yeah.
it brings me immense grief and frustration to see over and over, and that it's almost becoming a point where we're not even shocked to see it, while we should be, because it's so horrible.
In response to that, definitely something that had to be noted. I'm glad Andrew brought it up. Where to even begin, man? I think that with these hate crimes, what it does is that it imposes fear, right? The whole point of these kinds of things is, or not the point of it, just a lot of these happen often, and it's sad how we slowly get desensitized to how often these things just happen in America. Being an Asian American myself, I gotta say, these things just, as a way, it imposes fear onto everyone, or fear onto the ethnicity or targeted peoples. And the thing that we can only do to overcome this is just try to overcome that fear. And it's not easy. A lot of the other things that have happened through the last year towards, Black Lives Matter, everything, it's all just fear towards a targeted ethnicity, targeted population. And as easy as it might be to be like, these things happen and we just got to power through and overcome the fear, it's not so easy. Because when it happens more and more often and more of us just get desensitized to it, you can't really just let it go. So I don't know even like where to even begin with that, except say that we got to keep talking about it, I think, is the important thing. So hence why I said the importance of like Andrew bringing it up, just having it on the radar, knowing that you don't tuck these issues under the bed, I think is important, because a lot of that's what stemmed a lot of violence. The Capitol riot, for example, is a lot of issues that just were tucked under the bed and ignored. And all of that came up like in an explosion of fear, not fear, well, there's that too, but like aggression, anger, violence, all of that, just in a worse outcome. So having it still on the table, still being talked about, it's being aware of it is one thing on its own. So.
And I think what really appalled me was hearing about, I believe it was the police captain of the county where it happened. Yeah, he had some comment, and I can't quote it verbatim, but it was something to the effect of like he had a really bad day. Like, it sort of reminded me about, I believe our former president Trump even said something like it's like, this is what happens when like all these people are at home, in reference to some other act of violence. And I mean, I just think that attitude is really destructive. I mean, trying to defend these people and just ignoring like the hatred that's coming out, and just how terrible this thing is. And I think if we're not willing to confront it like that, we're not really gonna get anywhere. And I mean, it really made me very sad. I mean, this whole event made me sad. But I mean, that police captain talking like that and trying to defend this man for what he did. I mean, that really appalled me.
By defending him, you're just not letting them take accountability. It's just like, there's a reason why this happened. It kind of deflects the purpose of and the impact that this event happened to the Asian community. It's like, oh, it was just because he had a really bad day. It was like, no hard feelings. Like, what? I think, Chloe, you made a really good point about like being desensitized to this stuff, because I feel like as more and more things happen and more hate is getting perpetrated, it's becoming normal. And as like a minority and as an Asian, like I feel like we're not really looking to solve it, but we're looking to kind of protect ourselves. And like, what do we do to kind of like go under the radar, not like stand out or anything like that? And it's really sad, because that's not what we should be doing. We should be talking about these things. We should be going at it head on, because this is not something we should allow as a society. It's just saddening to think about. I don't know. I still am processing everything, but I'm glad we had a chance to kind of talk about it.
No, yeah. My main takeaway from that would just be like kind of be aware of it and keep the conversation going, along with many other things. I think everything else that's happening in the world. There's just so many issues in our world that are happening all at once. Keep talking about it, keep it alive. That way things actually can be discussed to some effectiveness, I think. All right. With that, sorry to go down on that note, but we have reached time for this episode. Thank you guys for listening. Big welcome to Clifford, to our Blurred Box family. We're really excited to continue having him on our podcast from this episode on out. Stay with us and stay with the Blurred Box podcast to hear more from Chloe, Andrew, Sophie, Clifford now, and Pooja, who unfortunately hasn't been able to be here today.
If you like our show and want to know more, check us out on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or please leave us a review on iTunes.
And be sure to join us in 2 weeks for another episode of Blurred Boxes. We'll be releasing episodes, I think, every other Sunday. I'm still not sure of the timing. We would love to hear your feedback, suggestions, and questions, which you can email to blurredbox88@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Instagram or Twitter at blurredbox for the latest updates.
A big thank you to our audio and video editors, Moshe Kraus and Jiayun Zhang, respectively. We could not do it without you guys, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you.